To understand how we get to shared meaning, we need to understand message characteristics, how messages work, how they function, how they come about, how they're distorted, in fact. And for the test for this, I'm going to use a clip from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's the famous Ferrari clip. And I'm kind of using the whole film actually as a framework for this whole concept of message characteristics. So bear with me here as I go through this. First off, what are messages? If you go back to that transactional model, you know messages happen right in the middle. The channels, messages fly through the channels between source receiver and source receiver within a dyad. They go back and forth that way, and they're pretty important in terms of conveying meaning. Okay, and shared meaning is difficult to come by for the most part. So the first concept here, the first characteristic about messages is that messages are packaged. And you should know or remember, I'm hoping, that from the axioms, the laws of communication we talked about at the top of the semester, that's one of the axioms, that communication's packaged. It has both verbal and nonverbal messages here, okay? Or verbal and nonverbal components within those messages. And we'll take a look at nonverbal components over the course of this module as well in terms of shared meaning. Here's Ferris Bueller when he's first introducing to Cameron the idea perhaps of taking the Ferrari out for a little spin in Chicago. And this is no regular Ferrari, okay? It's a classic. By today's standards, it's worth millions of dollars. Ferris has his own package going on here in terms of the suit that he's wearing, the tie, the shirt, even the style of his hair, the smile on his face. He's a salesman here. He's trying to go through and convince Cameron that this is the right thing to do. So messages, the packaging happens on two levels, as again we talked about in the axioms of communication, both the nonverbal level and the actual messages themselves. We speak in packages. We speak in envelopes, typically to somebody else with an opening, the feed forward, the business in the middle, a feedback, and then some kind of a close. And some people don't close. We'll get into those conversational characteristics here later on as well. Okay, so probably the easiest idea, the easiest message characteristic to understand is that it is both verbal and nonverbal. All right. Secondly, messages, there we go, are rule governed. We have all kinds of implied rules, especially within the social context. Both roles and rules are recognized within that. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is about a film that breaks those rules, obviously. Ferris lies about being sick. He plans a little day outing, and they go through all kinds of things in order to go through and pull this thing off by breaking all kinds of rules that good high school students otherwise adhere to that way. Messages are unclear. They're ambiguous. We don't always know what they mean, and that's the problem with them, is because that's when we start to obscure our ability to reach shared meaning. Okay, this is obscured throughout the film. We have lots of ambiguity that's happening in the storyline as it goes to keep everybody kind of on their toes, and the principal is one who doesn't do well on his toes within that. Messages vary in believability. Some interesting research here within the last 3 or 4 years gets into the concept about lying, and how lying really is it's an old form of communication. It's nothing new, and it is actually what's the word I'm looking for? It's inherent to our survival. It's a survival mechanism. We lied back when we were hunters and gatherers in terms of where we could find grains and hunting grounds. We lied to other people so they wouldn't go through and encroach on the very territories that we needed to go through and be able to survive. So this is it's really nothing new. And yet we look at lying in the society as an encroachment or as a deficit in integrity. And yeah, it is, no question. But we all lie on some level, and we all lie for justifiable reasons, different kinds of lying there. I spent an entire semester on this in a class I teach on lying and deception, and I won't get into it too much farther than this. We talked about messages varying in believability. That's what we're getting into, is that we like to think that the truth is absolute. And some capital T truths are, but general lowercase truths they exist on a continuum of believability. And again, the film goes through and when Cameron calls Mr. Rooney, he pretends to be the girl's father. That there's been a funeral. He's going to come by and pick her up. They perpetuate this huge lie, and somehow they go through and get away with that. Messages, lastly, are meta-communicative. And this is one characteristic of messages that students struggle with, and really it's very simple. A meta-communicative message is called a meta-message, okay? And a meta-message is a message about a message. Now, I just gave you a meta-message when I said many students have trouble understanding this. That's a meta-message. Understanding what? Understanding meta-communication. So that was a meta-message about meta-communication, which really was a meta-message, if you want to get technical with this. So this is conversational. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you next. That's a meta-message. So did you understand what it was that I was telling you? That's a meta-message, okay? So we have other meta-messages that are out there as well, or other meta-communicative messages, like Cameron's jersey. This is a Detroit Red Wings jersey. Not only is it a Red Wings jersey, but on the back it says Howe, H-O-W-E, for Gordie Howe. Anybody being an NHL fan would know what I'm talking about. Which was really what's called anachronistic within this film, because the movie doesn't take place in Detroit, it takes place in Chicago. And so if we're really going to have this kind of artifact to represent this kind of rebel, maybe it would have been a Blackhawks jersey instead of a Detroit Red Wings jersey. And this is where this becomes meta-communicative, because John Hughes, who is he's the director of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, grew up in Detroit. And then he also decided that Cameron's backstory, okay, that we know he has a horrible relationship with his father. The Ferrari scene goes through and really indicates that. But what we don't understand is that Cameron had a great relationship with his grandfather, who lived in Detroit, okay? And he would take Cameron to Red Wings games. And we don't know this. It's not even implied in the movie. We just had this little meta-communicative artifact, okay? This Detroit Red Wings jersey that Cameron wears throughout the whole Chicago visit, which is really interesting, because you try to do that nowadays in Chicago, and I don't think they would have had as much fun as they did on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay, so meta-communicative messages, or meta-messages, are messages about a message, all right? So to review, messages are packaged, they're rule-governed, they're ambiguous or unclear, they vary in believability, and lastly, they're meta-communicative. In the test that's coming up, I'm going to ask you to identify these 5 different message characteristics within a scene from the film Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Okay, and I'll post a scene so you can go through and take a look at it. You could find it in under the module or under pages for this class, all right? There's a lot more to understand. We're going to talk about a lot more in terms of nonverbal communication and barriers to shared meaning and so on, which will also be on the test. So pay attention, watch the videos, all right? All right?